It's like when life sucks and you feel alone and empty. Stick on some metal and life is better because somebody else knows the pain and the rage that you're going through.
be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself for the podcast?
I'm Maxwell Gravelle. I'm the rhythm lead guitar player for Setentia. I also do some backup vocals, sparingly.
Cool. So right now we are in Auckland, New Zealand, just a little bit behind... What arcade is this? What's the name of the arcade?
St. Kevin's Arcade.
St. Kevin's Arcade, where Whammy Bar is located, where we just saw Impetuous Ritual,
Distant Fear,
and Ave Teth, something like that.
Yes.
I'll take the hit for not remembering the opening band's name, but they were good. I have been in Auckland since Tuesday night, and I contacted a few people about doing a New Zealand-centered metal podcast, and Maxwell was kind enough to get back to me and meet me here at this gig, which I'm very appreciative of. So let's talk about Setentia. If you would, can you give me a brief history of the band?
So, Setentia started with Hugo, then drummer, and myself in university, wanting to start we'd always wanted to be in a band together. We weren't really sure what the theme was or what any of the aesthetic of the band would be. And it started out as some sort of 8-foot sativa type band, which, for those of you who were listening, is more or less like New Zealand's equivalent of At the Gates. A bit more thrashier. So anyway, it started off like that, and then eventually I got to experimenting with 3 guitars, mainly because at that time I was listening to a lot of Whitechapel and Faceless, but I didn't want to do the 3 guitar tracks like other bands had traditionally done them. So I got experimenting, and I've always been very interested in classical music, and Bach in particular with counterpoint harmonies. And then I just felt like I was onto something, and that's kind of where it was around that time in 2009 that we brought on another guitar player, which is Cameron Thompson, who's still with us. And then Jag, at a later point after a few shuffles around with different members, and that's how we became a 6-piece. And we've been going for around 6 or 7 years. The theme of the band is sort of about stuff that's more relatable to everybody. Purpose seems to be the theme of the band, and trying to find ways that common topics will relate to other people, whether it be depression, which I know is something quite big in the alternate scene, or how to deal with problems that everyone can relate to. So that's sort of where the lyrical context of the band fits in. But as far as the history of the band is concerned, yeah, we've always tried to do stuff that's different from what the rest of the metal scene's doing, which I think we've been able to capture relatively well.
How would you describe the music that you make? Would you label it?
I hate putting labels on our band, because if you had to pinpoint us down to a genre, we would probably be progressive death metal. But yeah, I tend to see the whole band as being a collection of different styles. So it's got an experimental aspect to it as well. But if I had to, it would be progressive death metal.
Would you describe your music as technical?
From a compositional standpoint, I would, but not from a purely, I wouldn't say technical like bands like Birdflesh or Necrophagus are technical. I'd say that we tend to stay away from that, because it's quite easy to lose your audience if you're doing too many notes. I'm more interested about drawing about a thematical sort of narrative within our music. So no, I would not classify us as technical.
The only reason I ask is you do play around with a lot of unorthodox time signatures and things like that.
Yes.
But that's not technical.
Well, like I say, it's more of a compositional point of technicality.
Fair enough.
Not so much on what we're playing. It's how the composition sounds.
Okay.
So we use a lot of 7/8, a lot of 9/8, a bit of mostly 8 signatures and divisions of 8, interspersed with subdivisions of 3/4 and 4/4, 5/4, 6/4. It just there's no deep thinking that happens into it. It's just kind of what comes out, and people have asked that before, and I just say, yeah, that's what was going through my head when I was writing these songs. It wasn't any I've got to try and make this formula happen, and mash it in. It was a very natural, organic process.
So we'll delve into it a little while later, but is there anything about being an Auckland band, being a New Zealand band, that you think rubs off on your music? Do you think you relate to what other bands in the area are doing? Is there a similarity at all that you see between your music and other people's music that come from this region?
That's a good question. I've always thought that any band of any style of music, and that's not metal, that comes from New Zealand always has a New Zealand stamp on it. I don't really know how to articulate it, but there's something that I can. Or if I find out that a band is from New Zealand, and I've never seen them play, I go, oh, okay, that makes sense, because there is like a filter or a saturation that just comes from being from New Zealand. As for us, I don't think that there's any band that sounds like what we do. A lot of bands or other people have pegged us against Ulcerate, which I'm not resentful for, but I disagree with. I don't think we sound anything like Ulcerate. There are lots of bands that are experimenting with this. Well, not experimenting, they're kind of copying this dissonant death metal sound, which has become a bit saturated. I mean, Ulcerate are truly the masters of that craft, and we wanted to steer away from that. But I don't know if us being in Auckland is something that really adds to our music. I suppose it's just we're from where we're from. I mean, Ulcerate's also from Auckland, and I don't think that their place of origin really has any impact on their sound or anything like that. It's just a place where we come from.
I interviewed Marco from Creeping a few years back, and one thing he brought up is that, in his opinion, well, it's something I'd heard and I asked him about it. All the bands that come from New Zealand have a very specific approach to the bass. The bass sound is harsh and kind of filthy, I guess is a way to describe it. Do you think Setentia fits into that?
When we started playing around with bass, Adam had kind of gone for a clean tone, and as we've gone on, he's settled for something that's more filthy, but it's still audible. It's not as heavily distorted as someone like Sculdum or again Ulcerate or Creeping would have, but it's definitely got that level of filth that filters through the bass tone. So I would agree with Marco there and say that New Zealand's band's approach to bass is by and large very, very disgusting and filthy.
let's talk about Darkness Transcends, which is your first album
First one, yeah.
and only album.
Yes. Well, it's a good 50 minutes.
It is a very good album. You guys started in, I think you said 2009?
Yes.
And Darkness Transcends came out in 2016. Can you tell me a little bit about the writing process?
God, it seems like such a long time ago because it took about 5 years to write the whole thing, start to finish. And the songs went through many different iterations. Throne of Thorns and Seeds of Death being the main songs that took the most amount of writing. Beyond Bionic Blame, I smashed out in a day. I can remember it like it was yesterday. It just seemed like I had this idea, and then the whole song was done in a few hours. It was a very organic process. Same with Enemy Within. I was listening to a lot of Decrepit Birth at the time when Polarity had just come out, and that was a really big influencer for me. Which is interesting because a lot of people say that it sounds like the Black Dahlia Murder, which I can see, but I don't really listen to a great deal of their music. The writing process for the other songs was I had to revisit the tracks over and over again, Throne of Thorns and Seeds of Death in particular, over many, many years, because those songs have a very unique approach to how the guitars talk to each other and the drums and the bass. But I would write one track, and then I would hand over the Guitar Pro tab to the other guys, and they would add to it, and we would jam it and come back and iterate and go, hey, what do you think of this? And then Hugo would add some drums, and Jag would lay some guitar parts over it, and we'd go back and forth, but we'd kind of have these basic structures where we would map the first half of the song out in one go, and then we would tweak and refine until we were happy with what we had. In terms of like the longer songs that I've mentioned, we always tried to find progressions that seem natural. I'm not a huge fan of when songs stop abruptly and then start into new riffs. I like it to just be continuous and free-flowing, and because that's where your time signatures and your peaks and troughs within the music slowing down or speeding up tend to make a lot more of a dynamic impact than if you just suddenly stop and go into a new riff. So, all the songs on the album more or less have very fluid transitions, and that was probably the point, the main point I would like to stress about those songs and the writing processes. I was being very much of a perfectionist, trying to find the transitions that were the most free-flowing, that weren't very disruptive or jarred. But it was a challenging write because the third guitars were being not a copy of everything else in the rhythm track, made it very challenging to write parts that weren't too contrasting or becoming too distracting from the rest of the music. But 5 years later, we got there. I think we did a very interesting job of what three guitars would do.
How do you know when a song is finished? When are you done with a song? When can you walk away from it?
I'll listen to a song, I wouldn't say hundreds of times, but I will listen to a song many, many times, and until I stop noticing bits that I've got to add, I'll usually write down post-it notes or little annotations on scraps, paper, and I'll take them home and put in my wallet and listen to the track again and again and again. And the moment when I stop is when I can't find any more things to write down, or when I'm simply satisfied by nothing else needs to change, and I can walk away from something and feel satisfied. No, I don't need to change this part, or these drums are too fast, too slow.
Is that how you feel about it now? Can you look back on the album and say you wouldn't change anything about it?
There is one part in particular in the last track, The Fruit of Life, which was going to change drastically into more of a war metal sound. And we decided to not change it for one reason, and it's because we felt like that our new sound, which we're currently working on, is a little bit more black metal influenced. I mean, most of us don't really listen to a lot of death metal anymore. Quite a lot of us don't actually listen to much metal anymore. But I always think about how that song would have sounded if we had kept that second section. But otherwise, I'm by and large happy with the way that the entire album turned out.
Would you consider releasing a second version as like a single, something like that, as an EP?
No, I think I'm done with that sound. I want to move on to something else.
Okay.
There's always room to explore. I think what makes that album very special is we wrote it. It's a very good capture, you know, a timestamp of what interests we were into at that point of our lives. And yeah, we're into different stuff now, and we're going to continue to grow and mature as musicians. So we'll explore different fields, different styles. But the new album is going to be very much more of a black metal sort of direction.
How much stuff do you have written?
We've got around 7 songs, just looking between 40 and 45 minutes. That's without tracks in between that we'll write, but they're still being tweaked. I think we have about 3 of those 7 that are completed. The rest are needing tweaks, whether it be in guitars or bass or additional guitar parts.
Do you have a timeline?
Well, it gets done when it gets done. At the moment, I'm just going through song by song and doing lyrics here and there, and programming drums and writing and doing guitar parts. It's hard to say. I'd like to get it done, you know, within a month, but things happen. You know, we're only human, and if I didn't have to work, I think I could get it done in, you know, a matter of weeks. But it's not the simple reality.
Let's talk about the release of Darkness Transcends, because there was a little bit of an interesting story behind that. I remember, because at the time I was searching for, you know, to expand on my knowledge of bands from New Zealand, I did stumble across your Bandcamp page, and I guess, was it a 2-song EP? 2-song promo that you guys released?
Yes, it was 2 songs.
Yeah.
So a shortened version of Throne of Thorns and Beyond My Epic Blame.
Right. And so I was really looking forward to the full release, which was up for a little while and then disappeared. And you guys had... Well, I should let you tell the story. So
after the demo... Well, not the demo, the promo, we released the full length, I think, within a week of the promo. We thought the reaction was okay for what the sound, for our niche. You know, we weren't expecting hundreds and hundreds of people to you know, start buying our record, but we had you know, around 50 or something. I remember, I could be wrong. Who bought it, and then we were approached by the label Blood Music, and he digged our stuff, and we signed a contract, and then we took the album down and we removed it off YouTube. To a lot of people's confusion, they were, you know, quite angry, and rightly so. They just paid for these albums, and then it just vanished. We had to keep hush about it because obviously we just signed, and then, you know, once it came out, I think everyone was kind of quite glad, you know, like, okay, you didn't just pull it down to be trolled or anything like that. We did have a better intention to release, and we thought that we got a fantastic reception. But yes, I think for a first release of a band in New Zealand doing a genre that is already quite saturated, I think that we were relatively well received, and Blood Music has been great to work with. It was very open to go, you know, back and forth.
they're a very interesting label. They have an eclectic selection of bands that aren't run-of-the-mill. Like, there's no old school death metal. There's no like grindcore that you've heard 1,000 times kind of bands. It's all, it's a weird mix of, I guess, what we're calling synth rock and progressive death metal and these strange kind of atmospheric black metal bands.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a niche label in the sense that you can't say, like, classic earache would be, if you like Carcass, you're probably going to like Entombed, you're probably going to like Bolt Thrower, like, those bands weren't necessarily that similar to each other, but you could see where they all fit into a certain space. And I think Blood Music touches on a mentality more than a sound. Like, they're not necessarily going for a specific genre or a specific region. It's all, if you like... I mean, this is the way I think about it, but if you like this weird kind of death metal, you might also like this weird kind of black metal. You might like this...
Weird kind of synthwave or something?
Exactly. Yeah. It's in a way, it's a lot like Mike Patton's label, Ipecac, where it's, stuff that doesn't really fit in anywhere else. And so they have a collection of, I would say, thoughtful and unusual bands. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think the approach that Blood Music has with its collection of artists is, in terms of the metal side of stuff, it's more about, for them, trying to find stuff that they like that is very different. Because, as you mentioned, grindcore is a very saturated genre. But there's already labels that have that established sound, whether it be, I'm trying to think of some names of the labels now, Osmos or Darkness Transcend or Relapse or Century Media, or they've all got those sort of pockets of the genre or the subgenres. And what Blood Music does is takes all the other special cases, whether it be Lichgate or Irreversible Mechanism or Gaia or I think they're called Uklagug, the other weird sort of project that the members from Igor are in, and all of them are so different from one another, but they all have that really weird point of difference. So it's just about, I would say eclectic, but that would be the wrong word. It's more that they're different and stand out in their own ways. But it's the merit of them being so different. Just what gives the label such great reputation in that regard.
How would you say you relate to the other bands on the label?
Because we fit into the subgenre of metal, but we don't sound anything like Irreversible Mechanism or Uklagug or Gaia or Scum. They're all different. It's simply that we fit within the same subgenre.
This New Zealand trip, my New Zealand trip, has been in the works for over a year, I would say. And I was always looking for A, money, and B, basically a good enough gig for me to visit and get a sense of the scene. I was almost here, I guess it was October, when Napalm Death played. Late September, early October, something like that?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. But I just
That
started...
was with Lockup and there were two other bands.
I'm not sure.
That was at the King's Arms, though.
Yeah, which is closed down.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Basically, whenever I had vacation days, there were no gigs. And whenever there were gigs, I couldn't get away from work. And so this was the first time in about a year where I actually was able to get away and check out a show. And I wanted to get a sense of what the scene is like in Auckland, but also in New Zealand, not just the bands, but the people. How would you describe the Auckland scene? We'll start with the Auckland scene, and then we'll talk about the New Zealand scene.
It's a good question. I suppose the...
Would you say it's small?
Well, all of the scenes throughout New Zealand are relatively small. Auckland and Wellington tend to be the bigger draw cards for international bands. And there's some great bands from all areas of New Zealand. I don't know if I could say...
I know.
If I could separate what makes each country, or not country, each city and town unique, what's their unique point of difference. But what I will say is that the scene as a whole is quite small, interconnected, lots of sharing of other members, very DIY focused. And there's usually something going on at least every 6 weeks, but at a maximum. But there's quite often stuff happening all the time, whether it be a few punk bands playing within a Whammy wine cellar or at a Tiger Spit garage or at a house party. So depends on the level of enthusiasm from the bands that are performing, but most bands will make posters and do poster runs and promote on the same usual channels, Facebook or on the radio or something like that, if they've got the means to do so.
Do metal bands get played on the radio here?
We have we have a couple of stations. We have BFM, which is the student radio station, and they have a segment that's on later in the evening. And then we have the Axe Attack, which is sort of the more, I wouldn't say generic, but it's the lighter metal stuff. And then we have, I feel really stupid forgetting this. I think it's called the Anger Management Show in Wellington, and they play everything, and they're fantastic. They play heavy, dirty, disgusting shit, and it's great. And I know a couple of guys that run that station. They're all great dudes. But we do surprisingly enough, we do have stations that play it. It's just not during the day. It's a bit of a shame. I'd love to be able to tune in. Yeah, we do have radio stations.
That's awesome. I say that because New York doesn't, and I don't think LA does. And KL, we have, surprisingly enough, on BFM, which is Business FM, which is a super dry, basically business-centered radio station. These guys have a show on Thursday nights, I think it's called Loud, where they play like a lot of metal. And I don't know how they were able to pull that off. But we have very little metal anywhere else in the country, but for some reason these guys have a radio show there. So I'm always surprised when a city or a country has like a metal show that's regular and people tune into. It's actually kind of unusual, unless you're in Norway or Sweden. Where,
And then it becomes a staple.
Speaking of other cities, New York has St. Vitus, and historically they had CBGBs. In Kale, we have Ruma Api. What would you say the venues are that have regular shows here in Auckland?
The small cloister that we've been at recently tonight is Whammy Bar, wine cellar, back room. They usually have shows there, and sometimes we have festivals where they trade off a couple times a year. As you mentioned, King's Arms has been disestablished, and they had gigs every weekend without fail. It's kind of sad now because the Whammy wine cellar back room is kind of the only venue that's in Auckland where they're doing consistent shows. Valhalla in Wellington has always got shows on, and there's another venue that's in Wellington, but I've forgotten the name. It will come back to me. And Dark Room in Christchurch, they do shows. Not too familiar with what happens in Wellington or Dunedin or anywhere else in the country, to be honest. We've never had the chance to play Dunedin, which I wish we could, because I think they've got a cool scene there. Machina Rex, fantastic. But yeah, it's hard to say. In terms of venues, there's not that much. There seems to be getting fewer and fewer. I mean, Power Station does the bigger bands. I saw Opeth there last year, and they did Devon Townsend earlier this year, and Meshuggah. But yeah, those are the big bands that play. And they've got usually two or three bands that will play as guests. But Whammy is the venue where people play it.
So, like, if you're in town on, like, Friday night or Saturday night,
Whammy would be the place to go. Okay. Yeah.
Cool. So we were talking a little bit before the gig, and you mentioned that you have some thoughts on starting your own space.
Yes, well, it's just a thought that I have with a couple of friends. They were already interested in doing it, but I'm keen to start up a shared venue, which would be an art space, a cafe, a rehearsal space, and a venue. If it could work, it would be somewhere within the central city that's in this, within walking distance of a train station or something like that. So it would still be accessible, but we need to really find a space and secure a lease and that sort of business. But that would be something I would be really passionate to do, and I know these guys that got me on board or sparked my interest are really keen to do it, so I'll have to catch up with them.
Sounds exciting. Actually, it sounds like kind of what happened too, because we didn't have a regular space in KL, and we needed a space in KL because every important music scene, I mean, CBGB's was not a pub club. CBGB's was a bar/restaurant that allowed bands to play, and they allowed the bands to play that couldn't play anywhere else, and that's how it became CBGB's. You know what I mean? But every great scene, this is a weird blind spot that people have, but every great scene needs a venue that people can go to every week, whether it's CBGB's or St. Vitus or Whammy Bar here or Rumapi in KL. And I think if there's a spot where people are like, well, we have bands and we don't have anywhere to play, then somebody needs to build that space. So.
Well, that's the way I think of what I was talking about before, is that there is a need that needs to be met.
Yeah.
And there will be a couple of us that band together that make it happen. I just hope that we don't get the same hurdles, the other venues in Auckland have had previously, particular King's Arms with their sound complaints.
Sure. Do you want to elucidate what those hurdles were?
It would be things like police, noise control and finding a place that's actually in a decent local area that's not going to annoy people. It's all basically pertaining to sound-related issues, and just being local enough.
Yeah, would you have to get a liquor license or?
Probably, yes. I'd say most definitely. And finding a place that has a smokers area which would be contained and not spill over sound-wise into other businesses or other residential areas.
I just thought of this. You're not allowed to smoke in the bars here in New Zealand.
No, they're trying to phase out smoking by, I think, 2050.
Okay. It only dawned on me just now because I live in a country where people smoke everywhere. So I was.
What's the same? I've just been in Germany, and it's the same there. In the Netherlands, you just have these little smoking rooms.
I just realized that my hoodie does not smell like smoke for the first time in, I don't know, maybe 6 years. So, I mean, no pressure, but if I'm back here in 6 months, are we going to have a cool art/performance space for me to visit?
Well, I would hope so. Well, we'll have to keep in contact, and then you'll find out. But I would hope so.
Right on. Is there anything you want to
add? Stay tuned for the next album that's coming out. We're all really excited with how it's coming along, and we hope to be able to start a tour, shortly after we release. So stay tuned.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Maxwell.
You're most welcome.